Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the homestead stuff, some updates. I spent a week in the desert doing a shooting competition with part of the family, not the whole family at once. And it's, it's one of those things that's always a little educational, no matter how many times you have done it in the past. And, my inclination right now is to take off. Just ditch everything, sell everything as fast and cheap as possible, and just go. There's plenty of money in the stuff that even at fire sale prices, we can do what we need to do. And most of my family members are okay with it. There's one significant hitch there. Someone who really needs a house in town kind of thing, and we're working on that. But if it was left to me, my inclination, I'd be like, okay, we're all living under trees for the spring until we get something built. I don't have a problem with, hey, let's go live under a tree for a while. A lot of people do have problems with that. Oddly enough, the kids are not part of the problems with that. They're perfectly fine, So I'm looking at the various stuff. We're pretty settled on there's going to be a couple of yurts popped up, probably going to be some dirt homes, buildings, whatever. Got a kind of a plan for how this is going to start to look. And the monolithic large house where everyone goes indoors and stays indoors and everything's indoors, that's not part of it. We've talked about bathrooms before, right? About how the idea of having the bathroom inside, located near your kitchen, just seems a little fucked up once you look at it from a certain perspective. Why is your bathroom inside? Why do you do that to yourself? That kind of thing. And I'm not really squigged. I don't get a lot of squick out of bathroom stuff. It's one of those things where if you're going to have those comparisons, the kitchen, honestly, is generally the dirtiest and most germy or contaminated or potentially dangerous place in the house. And having that indoors is actually seems relatively unsafe to me in general. Anyway, so we're not looking at least for the large property, I'm certainly not looking at the idea of a monolithic large house. I can see advantages to if you've got the money and the code and everything to putting up, a 60 by 120 foot shop building and then building out stuff inside there. It's a big, huge shell, It's a dried in shell. No rain, no wind, you're done. I can see the appeal to that, but I definitely want to live more in nature. I want to be more comfortable with walking around outside. And part of what I want to do, how I want to develop, is very tightly influenced by that. And so I look at things, a couple of yurts, a couple domes. The Pacific Domes lady, she's fantastic. She's been doing this since the 70s, and she's pretty neat. And some of her stuff is pretty neat. It's not the materials I would choose, but for the lifespan of the structure and the cost of the structure, it's not bad. They're very visible, which is actually a potential problem with I just don't want to mess with. I don't have neighbors close, but neighbors a mile away are still a mile away, and I don't want to deal with people being nosy, so to speak. So that's honestly the only thing I have with the domes, the Pacific Domes, or some other dome, is that the more structural you make the dome, the more permanent you make the dome, the more you're dealing with the joints and the ceiling and the caulk and the expansion and the mold and the airflow, and it gets more complicated and much more expensive. Domes aren't really particularly cheap when you try to build them into traditional houses. So there's that. Yurts are pretty much the same way. I can get a Mongolian yurt for about the same price as getting a Pacific Domes yurt, which is kind of interesting to think about, and there's a tradition there, and they're warm and they're nice, and there's those. And then, you go the other way. You've got the Oler. Oler is a guy in Idaho who started digging into hillsides and figured out the whole idea of having a double-ended underground house in a hillside where you have a north-facing uphill terraced patio and really nice, elegant building systems. But again, you're even with his airflow, you're dealing with a lot of indoors and a lot of really massive indoors, and I worry about the climate, the microenvironment quality. And that brings us to earthships, which is the other topic of today's video. And I think, I come back and forth with the earthships. Basically, it's an earth shelter design. And I understand earth shelter design, but when you bring it into the earthship concept, you're dealing with what becomes a machine. The whole house is an integrated machine, and it's kind of neat. Like, it really is kind of neat, but it's also very complex. And that's actually where it starts to get into my head that this is not something... I don't want to have to take care of my housing to that degree. This is where I'm going. If I needed to have that water cycle, the food cycle, the oxygen exchange, if I was really trying to do, a survive on Mars situation, that makes a lot more sense. But it's not what I'm trying to do. I've done the farming thing, I've done the garden thing, I've done the slaughter cows thing, I've done all the things, and I'm done. My kids know where food comes from. We understand the process. It's not something that I feel like I have to die doing. So it's not my goal right now. The potentials for self-sufficiency are always there. It's part of security. I know I can survive. Great, fantastic. But when it comes to something like an earthship, you're dealing with something that is a couple of hours of work every day, maintaining. And from a traditional homestead, I want to grow my food on my land and be isolated kind of situation. From that perspective, it's fantastic. Okay, an earthship is actually really, really good. You add your greenhouses and your other stuff outside, but the earthship itself is fantastic. Your heating, your cooling, your tubes, your airflow, your light, stability. The garden, the two gardens, you've got your gray water and your black water systems. It's all fantastic, all right? It's really, really neat. But it's a full-time food growing operation in your house, which is great if that's what you're into, but that's not what I want to do. So the earthship concept, as nice as it is, isn't something I want to do. It would be neat to see it expanded to the type of thing where if you have multi-generational family homes, communities, whatever, you have multiple residences in one ship and see how it works out. That could the arcology concept, that could actually be neat, but as it is, earthships are overly complicated. For all the simplicity and the low tech and the self-sufficiency, they are overly complicated for the basic needs of housing. And that's really where I'm at with this. So moving forward with the homestead, just as a report, I am definitely looking at more or less temporary structures for a lot of it. There's definitely going to be some dirt berming and some earthen walls and some stuff, and I may end up getting into some cob, and there's going to be some fun stuff there. But I think the concept of I think full-time glamping is just a better lifestyle. I think I'll leave it with that. It's not quite accurate. It's overly simplistic, but it's something to think about. Picture full-time glamping and how little crap you have to own to do it. In the homestead community, pack rat, hoarding issues are the rule. So that's something to think about. Like, how little can you live with? Stay sideways.